I saw my husband's car parked at our maid's door. I stopped and saw that they were talking. When I questioned him, he told me she had asked him to take her to the beauty salon because she didn't want to get an Uber. I was incredulous. Since when did she have that kind of intimacy with my husband? Or better yet, since when did they exchange messages? And since when did he think it was normal for a married man to give that kind of opening to an employee? I immediately fired her, asked her to deal with me about her money and delete my husband's phone number. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of our suburban home in Boston, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I remember that day with painful clarity, the way the light hit the crystal vase on the entryway table, how the scent of fresh coffee still lingered in the kitchen, and the weight of my phone in my hand as I scrolled through messages. That's when I saw it, a notification from our home security system showing my husband James's Mercedes pulling into our driveway at 7:30 a.m. Strange, since he'd left for an early meeting at 5:45. I frowned, setting my coffee mug down with a soft clink against the marble countertop. James had been acting distant lately, coming home late, taking calls in another room, password protecting his phone. After 12 years of marriage, I knew his patterns. Something was off. Probably nothing, I whispered to myself, fingers tapping nervously against the counter. But that little voice inside, the one that had guided me through a childhood in foster care, through college scholarships, through building my own interior design business from scratch, that voice was screaming. I grabbed my car keys and followed an impulse I couldn't explain. 20 minutes later, I was driving down Maple Street when I spotted his distinctive black Mercedes parked outside a modest apartment complex. Not just any building, the one where Maria, our maid of 3 years, lived. My stomach dropped. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. I pulled over, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Why would James be at Maria's apartment at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning? The same Maria who cleaned our home twice a week, who I'd helped with immigration paperwork, whose son's college application I'd proofread. I sat there, watching. 5 excruciating minutes passed before the apartment door opened. Maria stepped out first, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of the practical bun she wore while cleaning. She wore a fitted dress I'd never seen before. And then James appeared behind her, his hand lingering on her lower back as they talked. Heads bent close together. The intimacy of that simple gesture, his fingers splayed against the small of her back, sent a shockwave through me. 12 years of marriage crystallized into this moment of absolute clarity. My husband was having an affair with our maid. I should have driven away. Instead, I got out of my car, slamming the door hard enough to make them both look up. Their expressions shifted in unison. Surprise, then guilt, then something worse. Pity. Elaine. James straightened, his hand dropping from Maria's back. "What are you doing here?" The audacity of that question, as if I was the one who needed to explain myself, ignited something primal inside me. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your meeting got relocated to Maria's apartment." Maria had the decency to look ashamed, her eyes fixed on the concrete. James, however, slipped easily into the smooth, placating tone he used with difficult clients. "It's not what you think. Maria needed a ride to her salon appointment. She messaged me because her car broke down and she didn't want to spend money on an Uber." I laughed, the sound brittle in the morning air. "Since when does our maid have your personal number? Since when do you give rides to our employees?" Maria finally looked up. "Mrs. Walsh, I cut her off with a raised hand. "No, you don't speak. You're fired. Effective immediately. Any money we owe you, you'll deal with me directly. And you." I turned to James, fury replacing the initial shock. "You will delete her number right now." James's face hardened. "You're overreacting." "Elaine, it was a simple favour. Delete her number." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Unless you want to explain to your mother why her golden boy's marriage is suddenly in jeopardy." At the mention of his mother, the formidable Margaret Walsh, Boston socialite and controller of the Walsh Family Trust, James's expression changed. He pulled out his phone, making a show of deleting Maria's contact information. Maria stood awkwardly, clutching her purse. "Mrs. Walsh, please, I need this job. My son's tuition—" "You should have thought about that before." The words tasted bitter, but I couldn't stop them. "I want your keys to our house." "Now?" With trembling hands, she unhooked the key from her keychain and handed it over. Our fingers brushed, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. "There are other cleaning jobs in Boston," I said, softer now but still firm. "Find one where the husband isn't part of your duties." I turned and walked back to my car. Dignity intact, but heart crumbling. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. James and Maria stood exactly where I'd left them, watching me go. It struck me then, they weren't even denying it anymore. At home, I poured myself a generous glass of wine despite the early hour. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "It really wasn't what you think. We need to talk. I'll be home early." I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at our kitchen island, surrounded by the life we'd built together, the Viking range he'd insisted on, the Italian marble countertops I'd selected, photos from our vacation in Santorini last summer. Everything looked different now, as if the light had shifted and revealed dust and cracks I'd never noticed before. When the doorbell rang hours later, I assumed it was James, having forgotten his keys in his rush to comfort Maria. But when I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Margaret Walsh, my mother-in-law. 5 feet 4 inches of Chanel-clad determination. "Elaine," she said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. "James called. He says you're having some sort of episode." I closed the door slowly, counting to 5 in my head. "Did he mention where I found him this morning?" Margaret deposited her purse on the entryway table and fixed me with the assessing gaze that had intimidated Boston society for decades. "He said you misinterpreted a kind gesture toward an employee, that you fired the poor woman on the spot." "The poor woman was at her apartment with my husband at 8 a.m, Margaret, dressed for a date, not cleaning." Margaret waved this away like an annoying fly. "James explained all that. The woman needed a ride." "You know how generous James is, just like his father was." Richard Walsh had indeed been generous, particularly with his administrative assistants, if the Boston gossip was to be believed. I'd never mentioned those rumours to James. "Why would she ask him for a ride? Why not me? Why not an Uber?" I crossed my arms. "And why wouldn't he tell me about it?" "Because he knew you'd overreact, exactly as you're doing now." Margaret moved to the living room, settling onto the sofa as if preparing for a long negotiation. "Elaine, dear, you've always been sensitive about James's interactions with other women." My laugh was hollow. "I've never once complained about his female colleagues or friends. This is different." "Is it?" Margaret raised a perfectly penciled eyebrow. "Or are you looking for problems because you're frustrated with your own career? James mentioned your design business has been struggling." The deliberate pivot, the subtle undermining, classic Margaret tactics I'd witnessed countless times over family dinners, but never so blatantly directed at me. "My business is fine," I said evenly, "and this has nothing to do with work. I know what I saw." Margaret sighed, the sound laden with disappointment. "What exactly do you think you saw?" "Elaine, my son helping an employee. Or are you accusing him of something more sordid?" The challenge hung in the air between us. In 12 years of marriage, I'd maintained a careful peace with Margaret Walsh. I'd attended her charity galas, joined her country club despite hating golf, nodded along to her political opinions that made my skin crawl. I'd done it all for James, who worshipped his mother and depended on her approval almost as much as he depended on the trust fund she controlled. "I don't know what I saw," I admitted finally. But it didn't feel innocent. Margaret's expression softened into something that might have been mistaken for sympathy if you didn't know her better. "Marriage isn't always easy, dear. There are compromises, understandings. The Walsh men have always had certain appetites. Richard certainly did. I learned to look the other way when necessary." I stared at her, realization dawning cold and clear. "Are you suggesting I should ignore my husband's affair?" "For what? Family harmony? Financial security?" "I'm suggesting," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur, that you consider what you have to lose. This house, your lifestyle, access to the family connections that bring clients to your little business. James is generous with you. Elaine! More generous than many husbands would be to a wife who can't give them children. The blow landed precisely where intended. After years of fertility treatments, miscarriages, and finally the devastating news that I likely would never carry a child to term, Margaret had found my most vulnerable point and pressed hard. Get out, I said quietly. Elaine! Get out of my house, Margaret. I stood, shaking with rage. Tell your son he can come home when he's ready to tell me the truth, the whole truth. Margaret gathered her purse, her expression almost admiring. You have more spine than I gave you credit for, but consider my advice. Dear, the Walsh family takes care of its own. You're only family by marriage, a tenuous connection at best. After she left, I poured another glass of wine and called my oldest friend, Natalie. She arrived an hour later with Thai food and unwavering loyalty. What a witch, she declared after hearing about Margaret's visit. And James, total scumbag move. I don't know what to believe, I admitted, pushing pad thai around my plate without eating. Maybe it really was innocent. Maybe I am overreacting. Natalie fixed me with a stern look. Would James believe that if he found you at some guy's apartment at 8 a.m., dressed up and touching? She had a point. James had once questioned me relentlessly about a male client who texted after hours about a project. His jealousy had seemed protective then. Now it looked like projection. What should I do? I asked, feeling lost in a way I hadn't since those early foster care days. First, Natalie said, reaching for her purse, we get evidence. I brought you this. She handed me a small box containing what looked like a USB drive. It's a keylogger. Plug it into your home computer, and it'll record everything James types, emails, messages, passwords. It's how I caught my ex. I turned the device over in my hand. Moral qualms wrestling with the need to know the truth. Is this legal? It's your computer too, right? Shared marital property. Natalie shrugged. Look, you don't have to use it, but having it might make you feel less crazy when James tries to gaslight you about what you saw. After Natalie left, I sat alone in the growing darkness of our living room. The keylogger sat on the coffee table, a small black rectangle containing potential devastation. Was I ready for the truth? More importantly, was I ready for life after the truth? My phone lit up with another text from James. On my way home. Please be reasonable. I picked up the keylogger and walked to our shared home office. James arrived home at 9:38 p.m. I heard his key in the door, the familiar sound of his briefcase hitting the entryway table, his footsteps pausing at the bar cart where he invariably poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 18. Elaine? His voice carried uncertainty I'd rarely heard from him. I was sitting in the kitchen, a cup of tea gone cold in front of me. In here. He appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes but rumpled now, his blue eyes, the ones that had made me weak-kneed on our first date, wary. We need to talk about this morning, he said, loosening his tie. You completely misunderstood the situation. I said nothing, just watched him. This handsome man with his perfect pedigree and prestigious law firm partnership, had he ever been truly mine? Or had I been fooling myself for 12 years? Maria's car broke down. She has a salon appointment for a job interview. She reached out because she was desperate. James settled across from me at the kitchen island. It was nothing more than that. How does she have your number, James? He hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but enough. She's worked for us for 3 years. She probably got it from the contact information sheet we gave her. We never gave her your cell number. Just mine and the house line. I kept my voice even. Try again. Fine. I gave her my number months ago when you were in Chicago for that design conference. The dishwasher was making a strange noise, and I told her to text me if it got worse. Another lie. I'd been in Chicago last October. The dishwasher issue had been in February. Small inconsistencies, but they were adding up. Why didn't you tell me you were giving her a ride this morning? James ran a hand through his hair, a tell when he was stressed. Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You'd make it into something it wasn't. Then why delete her number when I asked? If it was all innocent. To make you happy, to diffuse the situation. His voice rose slightly. Elaine, you were causing a scene in public. I did what I needed to do to calm things down. I nodded slowly. And your mother? Why call her? James had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't. I called my sister to vent. And she must have told Mom. That, at least, I believed. Claire, James's younger sister, reported everything to Margaret. Your mother suggested I should look the other way if you're having an affair, like she did with your father. I watched his face carefully. Is that the Walsh family tradition? Wives who pretend not to notice? James blanched. She said that? Jesus, Elaine. No, there's no tradition because there's no affair. Then give me your phone. The words escaped before I could reconsider. What? Your phone. If there's nothing going on, you won't mind me looking through it. James stared at me, then laughed without humour. This is ridiculous. I'm not giving you my phone. It has confidential client information. You're being paranoid and, frankly, a little unstable. Unstable? The word hung between us. Is that what you told your mother? That I'm unstable? I said you overreacted, which you did. James stood, towering over me. I'm not having this conversation anymore. I'm going to shower and go to bed. Hopefully by morning you'll be thinking clearly again. He walked out, leaving me alone with my cold tea and growing certainty. James was lying. The question was, how much? I waited until the shower started running, then slipped into our home office. The keylogger was in place, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for it. I told myself it was just insurance, a way to verify what I hoped was true, that this morning had been a misunderstanding, that my marriage wasn't built on sand. But as I returned to the kitchen, I knew better. Trust, once cracked, is like a windshield. The damage only spreads with time. That night, I lay rigid on my side of the bed, listening to James's even breathing beside me. Once, his presence had made me feel safe. Now it made me feel like a stranger in my own home. I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, James's traditional peace offering after an argument. For a moment, habit nearly pulled me into our normal routine. Then yesterday crashed back, and I reached for my phone instead of getting up. There was a text from Natalie. Any updates? Here if you need to talk. And one from a number I didn't recognise. Mrs. Walsh, this is Maria. Please let me explain. It's not what you think. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the delete button. Did I want Maria's version of events? Would it matter? Before I could decide, another text appeared from the same number. Your husband has been helping me with my son's green card application. That's why we've been talking. Nothing inappropriate. Please don't tell him I contacted you. The green card claim stopped me cold. Maria's son Diego was 19, studying computer science at Bunker Hill Community College. I'd written him a recommendation letter last year. He'd been brought to the US as a baby. He would have DACA protection, not a green card. So this was another lie. But why? What possible reason would Maria have for meeting James secretly, if not? A terrible suspicion formed. I texted back. How long has he been helping you? The response came quickly. Since January, after I overheard his phone call. I sat up in bed. What phone call? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. With a woman named Vanessa about property in Florida. He was angry, saying she needed to be patient, that moving money takes time. I shouldn't have listened, but... My hands were shaking now. James had no clients named Vanessa. We owned no property in Florida, and James had been making frequent business trips to Miami since last December. Maria, I need you to tell me everything, in person. Can you meet today? When I finally walked downstairs, James was waiting with a full breakfast spread. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit. A mimosa. Peace offering, he said with the charming smile that had first captured my heart at a mutual friend's wedding. I hate fighting with you, Lainey. The nickname, one he used only in our most intimate moments, felt like another manipulation now. but I returned his smile and sat down. Me too, I lied, picking up the mimosa. Maybe I did overreact yesterday. Relief washed over his handsome features. You did, but I understand why. With everything we've been through, your emotions are all over the place. Our inability to have children, always the convenient explanation for any irrational behaviour on my part. Once it had hurt, now it just made me angry. You're right, I said, forcing vulnerability into my voice. I've been feeling so insecure lately, especially with you travelling so much for work. James reached for my hand, squeezing it. The Miami client is almost wrapped up. 2 more trips, Max. The real estate development. Right? I took a careful sip of my mimosa. How's that going? Great. They're finally securing the permits. Should close by end of summer. James's voice was smooth, practiced. I nodded as if this confirmed something I already knew, rather than being complete fiction. James had told me his Miami client was a tech startup looking to go public. I was thinking, I said carefully, maybe I could come with you next time, make a long weekend of it. I haven't been to Miami since college. The briefest flicker of panic crossed his face before he masked it. That's a great idea, but maybe for the final trip. This next one will be all-day meetings. Boring legal stuff? Of course. I took a bite of Eggs Benedict, tasting nothing. Whenever works for you. We finished breakfast with mundane conversation. A leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, his mother's upcoming charity gala, a potential new client for my design business. The perfect picture of marital harmony, if you didn't look too closely at the cracks in the foundation. After James left for work, I drove to the coffee shop where Maria had agreed to meet me. She was already there, nervously shredding a napkin at a corner table. Mrs. Walsh. She stood as I approached, her usually immaculate appearance now dishevelled. Eyes red-rimmed. Thank you for meeting me. Sit down, Maria. I took the chair opposite her, keeping my voice low. Tell me about this phone call you overheard. Maria glanced around the cafe before leaning forward. It was in January. I was cleaning your bedroom while Mr. Walsh was in his office. The door was open, and I heard him arguing with someone named Vanessa about property in Florida and money being moved. He said, "The Walsh Family Trust isn't a personal ATM, Vanessa. Margaret is asking questions already." I felt cold despite the warm cafe. And after you overheard this, he came out and saw me. He knew I had heard. Maria's hands trembled around her coffee cup. He said he would pay me extra to forget what I heard. At first it was just money. Then he started asking me to do other things. What things? Hold packages for him. Let him use my address sometimes for mail. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Last month he asked if he could use my apartment for a meeting, said his office was being renovated and he needed privacy. The pieces were falling into place, a sordid picture I couldn't unsee. Did you let him? Maria nodded, shame evident. Twice. Yesterday was going to be the 3rd time. He pays me $500 each time. My son's tuition. Her voice broke. I needed the money. Did you ever see who he was meeting? No. He asked me to leave during the meetings. Maria finally looked up. Mrs. Walsh, I never... With your husband. Never. I would not do that. I believed her, strangely enough. This wasn't about sex, it was about money. James was using our maid's apartment for clandestine meetings, and her address for correspondence he wanted hidden. But who was Vanessa? And what was this about moving money from the Walsh Family Trust? Maria, I need copies of any mail that came to your apartment for James, and I need to know exactly when he used your apartment for these meetings. She hesitated. He would be very angry. I'll pay you double whatever he's giving you. I reached for my purse. And I'll help with Diego's college expenses, legitimately. After a moment, Maria nodded. I can get you the mail. There's not much, 2 letters. And I wrote down the dates in my calendar because I needed to remember when to be gone. Good. And Maria? I met her eyes directly. You're not getting your job back, but I'll give you an excellent reference for a new one. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. James was hiding something significant, something involving his family's money. And whatever it was serious enough that he'd risk using our maid's apartment for secret meetings. I needed more information before confronting him. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. At home, I went straight to our office and logged into our shared desktop. The keylogger would take time to yield results. But there were other places to look. I started with our financial records, bank statements, investment accounts, tax returns from the last few years. Everything looked normal at first glance. James's substantial salary from the law firm deposited regularly, my more modest design business income, regular transfers to our investment accounts, mortgage payments, credit card bills for amounts that matched our lifestyle. But then I noticed something odd in our joint checking account. Every month for the past 6 months, there was a cash withdrawal of $2,000, always on the 15th, always in person at the same branch in downtown Boston. James and I rarely used cash. We put everything on credit cards for the travel points. Why would he suddenly need $2,000 in cash each month? I dug deeper, downloading statements from our investment account. Here too, something was off. 3 months ago, James had sold $50,000 worth of stocks without discussing it with me. The money had been transferred not to our joint checking account, but to an account number I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking as I logged into our retirement accounts. Here, the picture was even worse. James had taken a loan against his 401k in February, $100,000 with a 5-year repayment plan. We'd never discussed this, never needed the money. Our financial situation had always been comfortable thanks to James's salary and occasional gifts from the Walsh family trust. The trust. Maria had mentioned James arguing about money from the trust. I knew very little about it except that Margaret controlled it with an iron grip, doling out funds for approved expenses, our wedding, the down payment on our house, fertility treatments when we were trying to conceive. I needed to see the trust documents. But where would James keep them? Not in our home office. I'd have found them over the years. His law firm office, possibly. But I couldn't access that. Then I remembered the safe in our bedroom closet. James had installed it when we first bought the house, claiming it was for important documents and valuables. I'd rarely seen him open it, and I'd never known the combination. But I did know where he kept passwords, in a password-protected Excel file on his laptop. A laptop that now had a keylogger installed. I waited 2 excruciating days, playing the role of remorseful wife while gathering evidence piece by piece. Maria delivered copies of the mail sent to her apartment, letters from a law firm in Miami I'd never heard of, addressed to J. Walsh at her address. I finally opened the safe in our closet while he was at work. Inside, among birth certificates and property deeds, I found the Walsh family trust documents. As I read through the legal jargon, certain clauses jumped out at me. Distribution of principal limited to educational expenses, medical necessity, or first-time home purchase for beneficiaries. Any beneficiary found to be misappropriating trust assets shall forfeit their interest in the trust. Upon dissolution of marriage, spousal beneficiaries shall retain only those assets specifically distributed during the marriage. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. James was siphoning money from the trust, potentially illegally, and going to great lengths to hide it. The question was, why? What was so important that he'd risk his inheritance and our marriage? I was about to return the documents to the safe when a business card fell out. Vanessa Carrington. Real estate investment, Miami, FL, with a phone number. The final piece. I called the number from a blocked line, heart pounding. Vanessa Carrington, answered a woman with a slight southern accent. Ms. Carrington, this is Linda from Boston Trust Bank. I infused my voice with professional concern. We have some questions about recent transfers from the Walsh family account. A pause. I think you have the wrong number. I don't deal with any bank in Boston. This concerns properties purchased in Miami with Walsh family trust funds. Our records show transfers to your account totaling $320,000 over the past 8 months. Another. Longer pause. Who did you say you were again? Linda Matthews, Compliance Department. We're conducting a routine audit of unusual transaction patterns. Listen. Vanessa's voice dropped. Whatever James told you, those transfers were legitimate investments. I have all the paperwork. Investments in what? Exactly, Ms. Carrington. Beachfront development, luxury condos, it's all above board. And the trust administrator approved these investments, Margaret Walsh. A nervous laugh. You should really talk to James about this. It's his family's money. One last question, Ms. Carrington. What is your relationship to James Walsh? The line went dead. I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of my husband's deception. James was embezzling from his family's trust to invest in Miami real estate with a woman he'd never mentioned. A woman he was meeting secretly at our maid's apartment. A woman who hung up at the mention of Margaret Walsh. Everything pointed to one conclusion. James was having an affair with Vanessa Carrington and using the Walsh family trust to fund their joint venture. If Margaret found out, James would lose his inheritance. If I divorced him, I'd get nothing from the trust beyond what had already been distributed. I had 3 choices: confront James directly, tell Margaret what I'd discovered, or build an ironclad case before making my next move. I chose the third option. For the next week, I played my role perfectly. Doting wife, appropriately contrite about my overreaction to finding James at Maria's apartment. I even agreed to attend Margaret's charity gala, smiling through her subtle digs about my business and childlessness. Meanwhile, I methodically documented everything I'd found. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals, investment account transfers, email correspondence with Vanessa, the letters delivered to Maria's address, the dates of secret meetings. I compiled it all into a file, making copies that I stored in a safety deposit box at a bank where James and I had no accounts. I also consulted discreetly with a divorce attorney, describing the situation without naming names. Her advice was clear. In Massachusetts, hiding assets during divorce proceedings was illegal. If I could prove James was concealing funds, I'd be entitled to a portion of those assets regardless of the trust provisions. The final piece fell into place when Maria called to tell me James had contacted her again, asking to reschedule their meeting for the following Tuesday. He's offering $1,000 this time, she said, voice trembling. He seems desperate. Did he say who he's meeting? No. Just that it's very important, and he needs absolute privacy. I made a decision. Tell him yes, but I'll need a key to your apartment. Tuesday arrived with the weight of inevitability. I told James I had a client meeting in Cambridge that would run late. He kissed me goodbye, mentioning casually that he too would be working late, an important client dinner. Instead of going to Cambridge, I drove to Maria's apartment and let myself in. She had agreed to stay with her sister for the night, leaving me alone in the small, immaculate space. I positioned myself in the bedroom, door cracked open to view the living area where Maria had set up a small table with 2 chairs. At precisely 7 p.m, I heard a key in the lock. James entered, looking around nervously before setting his briefcase on the table. 10 minutes later, another knock at the door. James opened it to reveal a woman I'd never seen, tall, blonde, expensively dressed, Vanessa Carrington, in the flesh. "Where's Maria?" I heard Vanessa ask as she entered. "Visiting family. We have the place to ourselves." James's voice carried a familiarity that twisted my stomach. "Good. We need to talk about your mother." Vanessa settled into one of the chairs. "She's asking questions. My contact at the bank says she's requested all transaction records for the trust." James swore, running a hand through his hair. "How much time do we have?" "Days, maybe." "James, we need to move the last transfer now. The closing is Friday." "I can't access any more trust money right now. Margaret's watching everything." James opened his briefcase, removing a folder. "But I have another option." He placed the folder in front of Vanessa. From my hiding place, I could see it contained property deeds. "What am I looking at?" Vanessa asked. "My house. Well, technically our house. Mine and Elaine's. But she doesn't know the trust actually owns 75% of it. Margaret set it up that way to protect the family asset." I felt sick. Our home, the one we'd picked out together, that I'd spent years decorating, wasn't even truly ours. Another Walsh family secret. How does this help us? Vanessa was saying. The house has $800,000 in equity. If I get Margaret to transfer full ownership to me as a gift, we can take out a line of credit, enough to close on the Miami property. And Elaine won't notice a massive new loan? James's laugh was cold, unfamiliar. Elaine doesn't pay attention to our finances. She's too busy with her little design projects. Besides, I'll tell her it's an investment opportunity. She trusts me. The calculated dismissal, the casual cruelty. This wasn't the man I'd married. Or perhaps it was, and I'd been blind for 12 years. What about after? Vanessa's voice dropped lower. If your mother discovers what we've done, you'll lose everything. Not everything. James reached for her hand across the table. Once the Miami development is complete, we'll have our own wealth, independent of the Walsh name and fortune. We can finally be together openly. And your wife? A pause. I'll give her a generous settlement, enough to maintain appearances. Margaret will insist on that much. I'd heard enough. I pushed the bedroom door fully open and stepped out. Will she? James jumped to his feet, face draining of colour. Elaine! What the hell? Surprise, darling. I moved into the living room, calm despite the rage and hurt burning inside. I thought I'd join your important client dinner. Vanessa stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. James, what is this? This, I said before James could respond, is what happens when you use the maid's apartment for your affair. Sometimes the wife finds out. It's not what you think, James started, falling back on the same line he'd used when I caught him with Maria. It's exactly what I think. You're stealing from your family's trust to fund a real estate venture with your mistress. You're planning to take out a loan against our house, a house I didn't even know belonged mostly to your family's trust. And you were going to leave me once you had your own fortune built with stolen money. James's shock gave way to calculation. I could almost see him reassessing, looking for an angle. Elaine, please, let me explain. This is a legitimate business opportunity that Margaret wouldn't approve through normal channels. Vanessa is a business partner, nothing more. A business partner you meet secretly at our maid's apartment. A business partner you're planning to be with openly once you have your own wealth. I turned to Vanessa. Is that how he described your relationship to you? Just business? Vanessa looked between us, uncertainty clear on her face. James told me you were separating, that it was just a matter of timing and trust assets. I laughed, the sound brittle in the small apartment. Of course he did. Did he also tell you about our fertility treatments last year, the vacation we took in January, the anniversary dinner 2 weeks ago? Enough! James slammed his hand on the table. Both of you, stop. We need to discuss this rationally. Rationally? I pulled out my phone. Let's talk rationally about what happens when I show Margaret all the evidence I've gathered. Bank records, emails, the letters you had sent here. I pointed to Vanessa. Your meetings with her. For the first time, fear flickered across James's face. You wouldn't. You'd get nothing in the divorce if you do that. The trust protects me. Perhaps. But you'd lose everything. Your inheritance. Your law firm partnership. They tend to frown on financial fraud. Your reputation in Boston society. I kept my voice even. Is she worth all that, James? Vanessa began gathering her things. I should go. Stay. James grabbed her arm. She's bluffing. She won't tell Margaret. Actually, I said, pulling one final document from my purse. I already did. This morning, after I confirmed your meeting here tonight, this is a new amendment to the Walsh Family Trust. Signed today. I handed it to James, watching as he scanned it, his face growing increasingly pale. Effective immediately, James Richard Walsh is removed as beneficiary of the Walsh Family Trust due to misappropriation of trust assets. He read aloud, voice hoarse. This can't be legal. It's perfectly legal. Margaret had it drawn up by the family's attorney once I showed her the evidence. She was surprisingly understanding about my position. We had quite a heart-to-heart about Walsh men and their appetites. James sank into a chair, the document crumpled in his fist. You've ruined me. No, James. You did that yourself. I turned to Vanessa, who was edging toward the door. I'd reconsider that Miami investment if I were you. The funds are being recalled. Vanessa paused, hand on the doorknob. I'm sorry. I truly thought you two were over. We are now. I looked back at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband. I'll be staying at Natalie's tonight. You have until tomorrow evening to pack your things and leave our house. I emphasised the hour deliberately. You'll be hearing from my attorney. Elaine, please. James stood, desperation replacing shock. We can work this out. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of lies. I moved toward the door. Goodbye, James. Outside, the evening air felt like freedom. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. It's done. Call me tomorrow about the house transfer. In the end, Margaret Walsh had surprised me most of all. When presented with evidence of her son's betrayal, she'd been coldly pragmatic. The Walsh family reputation and fortune came first. James had threatened both, so James had to face consequences. Our alliance was one of convenience, not affection. I got the house transferred fully into my name. Compensation for emotional distress. And Margaret got my silence about the family's financial manipulations. James got nothing except a modest allowance conditional on his moving to Chicago to work for his uncle's firm, far from Boston society and Miami real estate ventures. Vanessa disappeared back to Florida after the Walsh family attorneys threatened legal action to recover misappropriated funds. The joint venture collapsed before it began. As for me, I rebuilt. My interior design business flourished once freed from the constraints of Walsh family expectations. I sold the too-large house in the suburbs and bought a waterfront condo in the city. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, even started dating again, cautiously with clearer eyes. Sometimes I think about those 12 years with James and wonder if there were signs I missed, red flags I ignored. Probably. But I prefer to focus on what I gained. Strength I never knew I possessed, independence I'd secretly craved, and the knowledge that I am more than capable of fighting for what's mine. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.